Open the National Weather Service's own homepage right now, and you'll see 4 separate, genuinely serious weather headlines stacked on top of each other, all active at the exact same moment. Tropical Storm Lala expected to become a hurricane, bearing down on Hawaii this weekend. Heavy rainfall, strong winds, dangerous surf, and localized flooding developing across the mid-Mississippi Valley, the Ohio Valley, and the Central Appalachians, with that same threat now shifting toward the mid-Atlantic. Record heat continuing across the south. And underneath all of it, a fire weather picture that's been building for weeks across multiple regions simultaneously. This isn't 4 unrelated headlines that happen to be sharing a homepage. This is one interconnected atmospheric pattern, a single sprawling weather system reshaping conditions from Hawaii to the Gulf Coast, to the Great Lakes, to the eastern seaboard, all within the same 7-day stretch. Today, we're walking through exactly how this pattern is unfolding right now, region by region, straight from the National Weather Service, the Weather Prediction Center, and the Storm Prediction Center. No exaggeration, just what the agency's actually tracking this or confirming in real time. If you want to keep following how this pattern develops, subscribe and turn on notifications, because conditions are genuinely shifting by the day across multiple regions at once. A thumbs up helps this critical information reach more people who need it. Let's get into it. Let's start with the National Weather Service's own framing of this moment, because it captures the core structure of what's actually happening better than any single regional forecast could on its own. According to the agency's national homepage, as of this week, 3 distinct hazards are being tracked simultaneously and explicitly flagged for the public. Lala, potentially becoming a hurricane, expected to impact Hawaii this weekend, with heavy rainfall, strong winds, dangerous surf, and localized flooding all specifically called out as expected impacts. Heavy rainfall and flash flooding concerns continuing from the mid-Mississippi Valley through the Ohio Valley into the Central Appalachians, with that threat specifically noted as shifting toward the mid-Atlantic later this weekend. And record heat continuing across areas of the South. 3 separate weather systems, 3 separate parts of the country, all active on the same homepage at the same moment, because they're all genuinely happening right now. Let's take Hawaii first, since it's the most immediate, most rapidly evolving piece of this picture. According to the Weather Prediction Center's Hawaii Extended Forecast discussion, issued early Friday morning, the primary focus through the weekend is the advancement of Tropical Storm Lala as it continues on a west-northwest heading toward the Big Island. The forecast discussion is specific about timing, noting that the most impactful period from Lala will occur Friday through Saturday, with the backside of the storm still likely to maintain trailing rain bands in its wake before finally tapering off as the region moves into Monday. That detail matters genuinely for anyone trying to plan around this storm, because it means the danger doesn't cleanly end the moment the storm's center passes. Trailing bands can continue producing hazardous conditions for a full day or more after the most intense part of the storm is technically moved through. There's a second, less obvious hazard buried in that same forecast discussion worth understanding directly, because it extends this storm's impact well beyond the weekend itself. Beyond Saturday, forecasters expect a return to the region's predominant northeast trade wind pattern, bringing passing showers specifically to the windward sides of the islands. Under normal circumstances, that kind of routine trade wind shower pattern wouldn't be especially notable. But the forecast is direct about why it matters this time. That additional rainfall will be falling on top of ground that's already become very saturated in Lala's wake. Saturated ground dramatically reduces how much additional rain an area can absorb before producing runoff and flooding, meaning even a fairly ordinary expected rain pattern arriving in the days immediately after Lala moves through carries elevated flood risks simply because of how much water the ground has already absorbed. Now let's move to the mainland, because the pattern gripping the central and eastern United States right now is genuinely just as significant, even without a named tropical system attached to it. According to the NWS Weather and Hazards Data Viewer, an active pattern is set to continue bringing heavy to excessive rainfall and flash flooding threats to the Midwest and Ohio Valley over the next couple of days. At the exact same time, dangerous heat continues across the central and southern plains and the southeast, persisting into next week, with genuine potential for record-tying or record-breaking temperatures, with many areas forecast to see their hottest temperatures of the entire year so far. Read that combination back for a moment, because it's genuinely the defining feature of this entire national pattern right now. Flash flooding actively threatening one broad region of the country, while dangerous, potentially record-setting heat simultaneously grips a different, overlapping region, not as 2 separate news stories, but as 2 sides of the exact same underlying atmospheric setup. The Weather Prediction Center's own extended forecast discussion, covering the period from Monday, August 17th through Friday, August 21st, lays out precisely why these 2 hazards are connected rather than coincidental. The discussion's own summary headline states it directly: a long-duration heat wave continues in the southeast, while a heavy rain threat gets renewed in the Midwest by Tuesday. According to the forecast discussion, southern tier upper level ridging will be well established heading into next week, bringing continued hazardous heat to the south-central United States and the southeast. To the north of that same ridge, a relatively active flow of weather systems will produce rounds of rain and thunderstorms across the northern tier of the country, with rainfall amounts forecast to peak specifically in the Midwest on Tuesday and the Great Lakes on Wednesday, carrying a genuine flash flooding threat along with it. This is genuinely the exact same mechanism we've discussed in earlier coverage of this summer's weather. A heat dome and an active storm track sitting adjacent to each other, sharing a boundary, with each side of that boundary experiencing an entirely different but directly connected kind of extreme weather. The ridge responsible for trapping heat across the south is, at the very same time, the reason storm systems are being steered and concentrated along the northern edge of that ridge, producing the heavy rainfall and flash flooding threat working through the Midwest and Great Lakes. Neither hazard is happening in isolation from the other. They're both direct products of the exact same upper atmosphere configuration. Let's get more specific about where the flash flooding threat is concentrated right now, because the National Weather Service's Fort Worth office laid out a genuinely detailed, region-specific picture worth understanding. According to that office's current hazard summary, heavy rainfall and flash flooding concerns extend from the mid-Mississippi Valley through the Ohio Valley into the central Appalachians, with that threat specifically noted as shifting toward the mid-Atlantic later this weekend. That's a genuinely broad geographic corridor, stretching from the nation's midsection all the way to the East Coast, and the fact that forecasters are explicitly tracking this threat's eastward migration rather than treating it as a single, static regional event reflects just how much this specific rainfall pattern is expected to continue moving and evolving over the coming days, rather than resolving quickly in any one location. The Storm Prediction Center's own longer-range outlook adds a genuinely useful technical layer to understanding exactly what's driving this. According to the Day 4-8 Convective Outlook issued early Saturday morning, an upper trough currently positioned over the Great Lakes and Midwest is expected to deepen by Tuesday, with increasing northwesterly flow aloft spreading across portions of the northern and central plains into the mid and upper Mississippi Valley. The forecast discussion notes that rich boundary layer moisture will be in place ahead of a surface front developing to the south and southeast. And while there's some genuine uncertainty regarding early day convection tied to cloud debris moving across parts of the region, most current model guidance suggests a corridor of strong atmospheric instability will develop by that afternoon. Forecasters specifically flagged that supercell wind profiles in that environment will support organized individual storm cells, potentially growing upscale into a larger, more continuous line of storms as the day progresses along the surface front. The specific hazard profile tied to that setup starts as a large hail risk, but forecasters noted it could transition toward more of a damaging wind risk, particularly if that upscale growth into a broader storm complex actually occurs as the system develops southeastward through the evening hours. It's worth pausing to translate that technical language into what it actually means for anyone living in the path of this system. A trough deepening over the Great Lakes and Midwest, combined with rich low-level moisture and a developing surface front, is precisely the recipe for organized, potentially severe thunderstorm activity, not simply scattered, garden-variety summer showers. The specific mention of supercell wind profiles indicates the atmospheric wind structure in this environment is favorable for producing rotating, more dangerous storm cells rather than storms that simply build and collapse without much organized structure. And the note about hail risk potentially transitioning into damaging wind risk as storms grow upscale reflects a genuinely common evolution in severe weather events. Individual, isolated supercells capable of producing large hail early in an event, gradually merging into a broader line of storms called a mesoscale convective system, which tends to shift the primary hazard from hail toward widespread, damaging straight-line wind gusts as that line matures and moves through. Now, let's turn to the heat side of this pattern in more detail, because record heat continues for areas of the South, as the National Weather Service's own homepage puts it, deserves real specificity rather than being treated as a vague, generic warning. According to Florida's own state emergency management weather tracking, oppressive heat and humidity continue across the state, with heat index values peaking in the middle hundreds to lower 110s. Extreme heat warnings, the more severe tier above a standard heat advisory, are currently in effect specifically for the eastern panhandle and the Big Bend region, with heat advisories issued throughout the remainder of the state. That's genuinely a heat index approaching, and in some cases exceeding, 110 degrees, a number that public health officials consistently flag as carrying serious, immediate risk of heat-related illness for anyone spending extended time outdoors without adequate hydration or cooling. Florida's forecast for today adds another compounding layer worth understanding, because heat isn't the only hazard active across the state right now. Isolated to scattered thunderstorms are expected across the state this afternoon, with a 30 to 60% chance of rain depending on location. And forecasters specifically flagged gusty winds, lightning, and torrential downpours as the primary hazards tied to the strongest of that activity. Beyond the heat and storm threats specifically, Florida's tracking also flagged a moderate risk for rip currents across the eastern panhandle and most East Coast beaches today, with a low risk for the remainder of the state's coastline, along with red tide observed at background concentrations in several counties, including Hillsborough, Manatee, Charlotte, Collier, and Wakulla, and background to low concentrations in Nassau and Duval counties. A coastal flood statement also remains in effect for the lower and middle Florida Keys, specifically for instances of minor saltwater flooding near and during high tide. That level of simultaneous, layered hazard tracking, extreme heat, thunderstorm and lightning risk, rip current danger, red tide, and coastal flooding, all active across a single state on a single day, genuinely illustrates something important about how this national pattern actually plays out on the ground. It's rarely just one hazard at a time for any given community. It's frequently several distinct, independently serious risks stacking on top of each other simultaneously, each requiring its own specific awareness and precautions, even within a single state's forecast for a single day. It's worth understanding just how significant this specific stretch of southern heat actually is in historical terms, because the Weather Prediction Center's own hazards summary was direct about the scale involved, describing genuine potential for record-tying or record-breaking temperatures, with many areas forecast to see their hottest temperatures so far this entire year. That's a meaningful distinction from simply saying an area is experiencing hot weather typical for August. When forecasters specifically flagged the possibility of a location recording its single hottest day of the entire year, during a stretch already well into the traditional peak of summer, it reflects a genuinely unusual, notable intensification of heat beyond what that region has already experienced across the preceding several months. Let's bring in one more genuinely useful piece of historical context for understanding how this kind of multi-hazard national pattern typically gets tracked and communicated at the regional level, because it illustrates just how consistent this basic structure, simultaneous heat, severe storms, flash flooding, and fire weather threats, tends to be for this specific stretch of the calendar. FEMA Region 6, covering Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana, has historically tracked exactly this kind of layered, multi-hazard threat matrix during this same mid-August window in prior years, with weather threat briefings explicitly cataloging simultaneous heat, severe storm, flash flood, and fire weather risk across different specific counties and parishes within the same 5-day forecast window. That kind of structured, multi-category threat tracking, maintained continuously by regional FEMA offices working directly with National Weather Service forecast offices, reflects just how routine and how seriously institutionalized this practice of tracking several genuinely distinct, simultaneous hazards has become across the exact stretch of the country and calendar we're discussing right now. Now, let's connect this entire national picture back to the broader seasonal pattern we've discussed in previous coverage, because none of what's happening this week is disconnected from the bigger climate story that's been building all summer. According to NOAA's own August update to the 2026 hurricane outlook, a rapidly strengthening El Niño in the Pacific has been identified as the primary driver behind several of the season's most significant weather patterns, an event capable of reshaping conditions across the entire country simultaneously, generally suppressing storm formation in the Atlantic while fueling elevated activity across the Pacific. Exactly the pattern currently on display with Lala bearing down on Hawaii, even as the Atlantic basin has remained comparatively quiet by historical standards. That same broad atmospheric influence connects directly to the specific ridge and trough configuration currently driving heat into the south, while simultaneously channeling storm systems and flash flooding into the Midwest and Great Lakes. The same fundamental mechanism, a persistent area of high pressure paired with an active storm track running along its northern edge, that meteorologists have been tracking as a defining feature of this entire summer's weather. So, pulling this genuinely sprawling multi-region national picture together, what's the actual honest through line connecting Hawaii, the Midwest, the Ohio Valley, the Appalachians, the Mid-Atlantic, and the South, all at the exact same moment? It's this: a single dominant atmospheric configuration, an entrenched ridge of high pressure sitting over the southern tier of the country, paired with an active, storm-producing trough working along its northern edge, and a completely separate but simultaneously developing tropical system out in the Pacific, is together producing genuinely serious, specific, and in several cases record-threatening weather across nearly every region of the country at once. This isn't four unrelated stories that happen to break in the same week by coincidence. It's one interconnected pattern, expressing itself differently depending on which specific region you're standing in. Dangerous heat and humidity across the south, severe thunderstorms and flash flooding working through the Midwest and toward the mid-Atlantic, and a rapidly intensifying tropical storm threatening to become a hurricane as it bears down on Hawaii. For anyone trying to figure out what genuine preparedness actually looks like this week, given everything we've just walked through, the guidance breaks down clearly by region. If you're in Hawaii, particularly on the Big Island given the active threat from Lala, understand that the most impactful period runs from today through Saturday, but that trailing rain bands and hazardous conditions could persist into Monday, and that ground already saturated by the storm itself will make even routine trade wind showers arriving afterward a genuine flooding risk. Prepare now, secure outdoor property, and continue checking updates directly from the National Weather Service and Central Pacific Hurricane Center. If you're anywhere across the mid-Mississippi Valley, the Ohio Valley, the Central Appalachians, or the broader Midwest and Great Lakes region, treat the active flash flood threat with real seriousness through the coming days, particularly as that risk is specifically forecast to shift toward the mid-Atlantic by this weekend. Given the Storm Prediction Center's own outlook flagging potential supercell activity capable of producing large hail and transitioning into damaging straight-line winds as storms grow upscale, avoid driving through flooded roadways under any circumstances, and keep updated Weather Prediction Center and Storm Prediction Center outlooks close at hand as this system continues evolving day by day. If you're anywhere across the South, particularly given the specific extreme heat warnings currently active for Florida's eastern panhandle and Big Bend region, and the broader potential for record or near-record heat across the central and southern plains and southeast heading into next week, this is a genuinely serious, sustained heat event worth treating with real caution, limiting outdoor activity during peak afternoon hours, staying consistently hydrated, and checking on elderly neighbors or anyone without reliable access to air conditioning. If you're anywhere along Florida's coastline specifically, keep the current moderate risk for rip currents along the eastern panhandle and east coast beaches in mind before entering the water, independent of how calm conditions might look from the shore. The honest, complete bottom line across this entire week is that there isn't one single national weather story to point to right now, and there hasn't been for the past several weeks running. There's a genuinely interconnected, multi-region pattern, dangerous heat gripping the south and pushing toward records, an active storm track producing severe weather and flash flooding across the Midwest and moving toward the mid-Atlantic, and a rapidly strengthening tropical system threatening to become a hurricane as it bears down on Hawaii, all playing out simultaneously, all tracing back to the same broad atmospheric configuration currently sitting over North America and the Pacific. We'll keep tracking how this pattern continues to develop across every region it's currently affecting, from Lala's approach toward Hawaii to the flash flooding threat working its way toward the mid-Atlantic to whatever comes next for the South's ongoing heat wave. Subscribe so you don't miss those updates as this story continues unfolding through the rest of the week. And genuinely, wherever you're watching this from, take a few minutes today to check your own local National Weather Service forecast directly, since the specific threat that matters most to you right now, whether that's flash flooding, dangerous heat, severe storms, or if you're in Hawaii, a strengthening tropical cyclone, depends entirely on exactly where you live. Drop a comment letting me know what conditions actually look like where you are right now. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.